You are holding in your hand a stone pipe, not a cheap plastic pipe bought at a convenience store, not something you could order on Amazon at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is a 3,000-year-old pipe just pulled up from the earth, heavier than you thought, worn smooth to the exact shape of a human hand, and inside there is still a thin layer of black residue from something burned long before you were born. The first question most people ask is who held this pipe, but that is not the right question. The right question, the question almost no one thinks of, is what was inside it, because the answer is not tobacco, not anything you are thinking of right now. And this is what no school teaches you. Ancient humans did not just smoke one thing. They smoked hundreds of different things, across dozens of different civilizations, with thousands of years of sophisticated knowledge behind each choice. A vast botanical knowledge base built over thousands of years of experimentation and passed down. And the modern world has almost completely erased that entire store of knowledge without anyone noticing. This is the story of what ancient humans actually put into smoke. And why that question matters far more than you think. The human brain has receptors, not one or two, but billions of receptors, distributed throughout the nervous system, designed to receive chemical signals from the body, from the environment, from food, from the air. Among them are cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, densely located in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, the regions that coordinate memory, emotion, and decision-making. There are mu and kappa opioid receptors, scattered throughout the central nervous system, responsible for regulating pain and the sensation of reward. There are nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, part of the autonomic nervous system that coordinates alertness and the ability to focus. All these locks existed in the human brain long before humans knew any plant that contained the corresponding keys. And this is where everything starts to get truly strange. Nicotine, the chemical that billions of people today are dependent on, was not originally produced by the tobacco plant to serve humans. It was produced to kill insects. Nicotine is an extremely powerful neurotoxin to small insect species, attacking their nervous system and killing them before they can eat the plant's leaves. The tobacco plant had no intention toward humans at all. It was just trying to survive. THC, the psychoactive compound in the cannabis plant, originally served as a chemical barrier against mold and fungus. The cannabis plant produces THC in the resin glands covering its flowers like a protective armor against fungal pathogens in high humidity conditions. There was no plan for humans here either. Morphine, the foundation of all modern pain relief medicine, was the opium poppy plant's defensive weapon against herbivores. When an animal began nibbling on the opium poppy, the morphine in the plant's resin would induce a state of drowsiness and disorientation sufficient to make the animal wander off. That was its entire original purpose. So what happened? The human brain, extraordinarily flexible and curious to a dangerous degree, touched these chemicals and reacted in ways no plant could have predicted. The CB1 receptor does not distinguish between the endocannabinoids the body produces itself and THC from a plant in Central Asia. The opioid receptor does not distinguish between endogenous endorphins and morphine from the opium poppy's resin. The nicotinic receptor does not distinguish between natural acetylcholine and nicotine from dried tobacco leaves. The lock only recognizes the shape of the key. And when those keys, no matter where they came from, fit the right lock, the human brain is not confused. The human brain is like, oh hello, I have been waiting for you. Think about that for a second. The entire history of humans with these plants, thousands of years of ritual, medicine, trade, war, and addiction, all could have begun from a chemical coincidence that neither side deliberately created. But the real question is not why the key fits the lock. The real question is why those locks existed in the human brain in the first place, and whether this coincidence was truly random or not. The answer to that question will come later. For now, let us look at what ancient humans actually discovered. There is one truth we often overlook when thinking about our ancestors, and that truth is they were not stupid. In fact, in one specific field, they may have been far more skilled than anyone reading this. Hunter-gatherers living in the forest had no choice but to become expert botanists, not because they liked it, but because one mistake meant death. Mistaking one type of mushroom meant dying that very night. Not recognizing which root had nutritional value meant starving through winter. Not knowing which leaf stopped bleeding meant dying from a wound that a modern doctor would treat in 10 minutes. That natural selection pressure stretching across tens of thousands of years through hundreds of generations, created a kind of expertise that no medical school in the world today could teach, because it is not in books. It is in the body, in communal memory, in stories told and retold around the campfire, until the youngest child in the tribe knew them by heart. And in that vast store of knowledge, there was one specialized part that ancient humans built with astonishing sophistication: plants that altered consciousness when burned. They did not classify by Latin names, they did not have mass spectrometers or gas chromatographs. They classified by the only thing that mattered, the effect. This plant, when burned, gave dreams so vivid you woke up still remembering every detail. That plant eased pain so much that a severely injured person could sleep. That other plant only the elders in the tribe were allowed to use, because the young were not yet strong enough to endure what it opened. That plant, the one growing near the stream on the eastern bank, was absolutely not to be touched alone, and if someone overdosed, the line between seeing spirits and never waking up was extremely thin. This was not superstition. This was practical pharmacology, developed through real-world testing, with the cost of failed experiments sometimes being human lives. The difference between ancient botanical knowledge and modern pharmacology is not that one was more sophisticated than the other. The difference is only in the method. One side uses machines, laboratories, and peer-reviewed journals. The other side uses the human body, direct experimentation, and communal memory transmitted orally across generations. Both lead to real knowledge. And the knowledge of ancient humans had accumulated for thousands of years before the first laboratory appeared on this earth. Think of it as a library, without books, without shelves, without indexes, but containing a volume of information that we have only begun to understand a small part of. So what did they discover? Let us go through them one by one. The first plant on this list has the most impressive geographic journey in history. Cannabis originated in Central Asia, and from about 10,000 years ago, it began to follow humans across the Eurasian continent. First for its fiber, then for its nutritious seeds. And somewhere along that journey, someone realized that when you burned the flowers and leaves of this plant, something completely different happened to the mind. The earliest direct evidence we have comes from the Jerzhankul cemetery on the Pamirs Plateau in Xinjiang, dating to about 2,500 years old. The research team led by Meng Ren and Nicole Boivin, published in Science Advances in 2019, analyzed 10 wooden incense burners from 8 tombs using GCMS and detected traces of cannabinol, an oxidation product of THC, inside 9 out of the 10 burners. More importantly, the unusually high cannabinoid content suggested that the cannabis plants here had been deliberately selected for high potency, not random wild plants. The Scythians on the Eurasian steppe were also recorded as using cannabis, and archaeological evidence has confirmed what Herodotus described from the 5th century before the Common Era, but the specific technical details of their use will come later. What matters here is that humans 2,500 years ago not only knew about cannabis, they knew how to select high-potency strains and use it in the most important rituals of life. That was not random behavior. Now let us cross the ocean to the other side of the world, where an entirely different story was unfolding in parallel with no contact whatsoever with Central Asia. Tobacco is the most striking example of geographic isolation in the history of pharmacology. The genus Nicotiana simply did not exist in the Old World before 1492, meaning the entire history of tobacco use by indigenous Americans took place completely independently. In 2021, Darren Duke and his research team published in Nature Human Behavior the discovery of 12,300-year-old Nicotiana attenuata seeds at the Wishbone site in the Great Salt Lake Desert, Utah, pushing back the earliest evidence of tobacco use by 9,000 years from previous records. Before that, the earliest evidence was nicotine residue in ceramic pipes in Alabama dating to 3,300 years old, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2018. But to understand ancient tobacco, you need to know this. The Nicotiana genus has more than 70 species with extremely variable nicotine content, and indigenous Americans clearly distinguished each species for different purposes. More importantly, they rarely smoked tobacco alone, often mixing it with many other plant species in blends called kinnikinic. But what was in that kinnikinic? The answer will come right after this. For now, let us go to the third continent. The opium poppy has evidence of cultivation in the Western Mediterranean from about 5,000 years before the Common Era. The Sumerians called it Hul Gil, the plant of joy, and recorded it on clay tablets around 3,400 years before the Common Era. The Ebers Papyrus, an ancient Egyptian medical text dating to 1,550 years before the Common Era, lists opium as a remedy for pain and for excessive crying in children. Homer in the Odyssey mentions nepenthe, something mixed into wine to erase sorrow, which many scholars believe was opium. But here is what most modern people do not know. Ancient humans mostly did not smoke the opium poppy. They ate its resin, drank it in wine, applied it to wounds. Smoking opium only became common in East Asia from about the 15th to 17th centuries after the Common Era, when tobacco pipes from the Americas reached Asian opium users and completely changed how they consumed this substance. The same chemical compound, but the appearance of a new tool created an entirely new pattern of use. The tool is not just a means, the tool shapes how humans experience what they are using, and that is what we will go deeper into next. So what did that kinnikinnick include? The answer will tell you about the part of the library that no textbook has. Let us start in Australia, where Aboriginal people had been working with a plant that the rest of the world barely knew about until the 19th century. Pituri, Duboisia hupwoodii, is a shrub that grows in the arid interior, and the way Aboriginal people prepared it was not simply picking the leaves and burning them straight, but a multi-step process, harvesting the leaves at the right season, drying them, then mixing them with acacia tree ash to alkalize the mixture because an alkaline environment releases the alkaloids far more effectively. That mixture was chewed or smoked, with the main effect being suppression of hunger and thirst, extremely valuable on long hunting trips across the desert. Pituri contains scopolamine and hyoscyamine, and the clearest evidence of its value is the existence of trade routes stretching hundreds of kilometers just to exchange pituri. In a society without currency, anything transported that far had value equivalent to gold. Moving to Europe, henbane, Hyoscyamus niger, has left traces at dozens of archaeological sites in the form of seeds stored in Bronze Age ceramic vessels. The physician Dioscorides, in the 1st century after the Common Era, described in detail how to inhale henbane smoke to treat toothache. Henbane contains scopolamine and atropine, two compounds that modern medicine still uses, with scopolamine in motion sickness patches and atropine in eye surgery. Ancient people did not know their chemical names, but they knew the effects, and that was the only thing that mattered. Next is datura, the Jimson weed plant, the most dangerous one on this list because its alkaloid content varies extremely even between plants of the same species, making the line between hallucination and death impossible to predict. Yet the Luiseno people in California used datura in initiation rites for young men entering adulthood across many generations without wiping out their communities, and that is precisely evidence of a knowledge control system of such sophistication that we are only beginning to properly evaluate it. In Central Asia, ephedra stands at the blurry intersection between medicine and spirituality. It contains ephedrine, a compound modern medicine uses in nasal decongestants, and that was once common in sports stimulants before being banned. The hypothesis that soma, the divine drink in ancient Indian Vedic texts, may have been ephedra has sparked more than 2 centuries of academic debate, with no conclusion yet, and from the mountains of Oaxaca in Mexico, salvia divinorum was used by the Mazatec people in healing rituals with one astonishing technical detail. They did not burn and inhale it, but chewed the fresh leaves very slowly and held them in the mouth for a long time, because salvinorin A breaks down in the digestive tract but is well absorbed through the oral mucosa. No laboratory was needed to discover that, only enough time and enough attention to listen to what the body responded with. These are only 5 examples. The full list includes hundreds of other species, and many of them are disappearing along with the languages and communities tied to them. But those plants did not exist in a vacuum. They were used for specific purposes, in specific contexts, by people with specific reasons. And when you look at the entire historical record, one thing becomes clear. The same behavior, putting smoke into the body, was used by humans everywhere for 3 completely different purposes, with 3 completely different ways of imagining smoke. The first purpose was medical, and it is far older than you think. Hippocrates, the person after whom modern doctors still name their professional oath, wrote about inhaling herbal vapors to treat lung diseases. In ancient India, the Charaka Samhita text of the Ayurveda system described in detail a practice called dhumapana, literally drinking smoke, with specific indications for which plants to use for which conditions and how to prepare them. Ancient Chinese medicine also used herbal smoke as a clearly documented treatment method. From a modern perspective, this sounds contradictory, treating lung disease by inhaling smoke into the lungs? But the thinking behind it was not crazy at all. The lungs are the fastest delivery system the human body has. What you inhale goes straight into the bloodstream in seconds without passing through the digestive tract. We still do exactly that today, with nebulizers, asthma inhalers, and anesthetic gases. The delivery method through the lungs has remained. The part about burning has not. The second purpose was spiritual, and the interesting part is not the practice itself, but the way different cultures imagined smoke in completely different ways. The Taino people in the Caribbean used cohoba so that shamans could communicate with the zimis, the guardian spirits. For the Taino, smoke was a living entity capable of carrying prayers up to the heavens and bringing visions down to earth. The Sioux with the Chanunpa had a completely different vision. Smoke was commitment. Blowing smoke in a negotiation was an unbreakable promise. Ancient Greeks imagined smoke as the breath of the gods, the only thing that could travel straight up from the human world to the divine world. The same physical phenomenon, three completely different worldviews. The third purpose is the least talked about, but maybe the most important from an evolutionary perspective. The Cherokee used pipes in peace negotiations between tribes. Sharing a pipe was sealing an agreement with the most sacred thing both sides could put on the table. And modern neuroscience has confirmed this was not just symbolic. Shared rituals synchronize neural activity between group members, increase mutual trust, and strengthen collective identity in measurable ways. The smoke circle was not a party. It was social infrastructure, technology used to build the kind of trust that allowed groups of people to enter dangerous situations together and return alive. In a world without legal contracts or courts, that was one of the strongest bonding tools humans had. But the question of what ancient humans used to smoke is not only a question about materials, it is also a question about technique, about the objects humans invented, perfected, and passed down to deliver smoke into the body in different ways. And each tool was not just a means, it shaped the entire experience, the entire ritual, and the entire meaning of the behavior. The Adena and Hopewell people in the Ohio Valley, from about 100 years before the Common Era to 500 years after the Common Era, created pipes from red catlinite stone carved into animals and humans with a level of sophistication that modern archaeologists still marvel at. These pipes were not placed on shelves as decorations. They were buried with the dead as the most important grave goods because they were sacred objects rather than ordinary tools. In India, the chilam, a straight tube without a chamber, associated with Shaiva monks and sadhus, has a shape that is not random. Its vertical orientation was designed for gravity-assisted inhalation, a specific posture tied to specific meditation practices, and in this case the tool and the ritual are completely inseparable. In East Africa, evidence of water-filtered pipes dating back at least 1,400 years, made first from gourd shells and later from earthenware in Ethiopia. The principle of filtering smoke through water to cool it and remove coarse particles was a genuine technical invention, independently discovered in many different parts of the world. The Maya from at least 800 after the Common Era rolled tobacco leaves into cigars, depicted in stone reliefs and ceramic vessels, not because they did not know how to make pipes, but because the rolled leaf cigar had a completely different technical property. It was consumed in the process of use and never reused. And then there were the Scythians, nomadic people on the Eurasian steppe, with a technique that the historian Herodotus described in the 5th century before the Common Era, and that scholars doubted for many centuries afterward until archaeologists excavated kurgans and found exactly what he described: small canvas tents, red-hot stones, bronze vessels, and charred hemp seed remains. Their technique, throwing the material onto hot stones instead of burning it directly, was actually more sophisticated than ordinary burning because it better controlled the temperature, avoided completely combusting the material, and preserved more active compounds. This is exactly the operating principle of modern vaporizer devices that millions of people use today, and the Scythians invented it 2,500 years ago. That reminds us of an important truth. The same substance, but a different tool, creates completely different behavior. The opium poppy was eaten and drunk in wine for thousands of years. It only became something smoked when the tobacco pipe from the Americas reached users in East Asia and changed everything. Up to this point, we have talked about specific plants, specific tools, and specific purposes. But there is a bigger question hidden behind it all, a question that writer Michael Pollan raised in his book The Botany of Desire in a way no one had dared to put so bluntly before. That question is, what if it was not humans who domesticated plants, but plants that domesticated humans? The idea sounds crazy until you look at the numbers. Cannabis today is grown in every time zone on Earth, in every climate condition, by millions of people willing to spend time, money, and sometimes even their freedom to care for that plant. Nicotiana is grown in more than 100 countries. Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy that originally came from a small corner of the Mediterranean, has reached Afghanistan, Myanmar, Colombia, and dozens of other countries. From the perspective of plant genes, these are species that have won the evolutionary competition absolutely. They have convinced the animal most capable of changing the environment on Earth to become their cultivation partner, and spread them everywhere. The theory of coevolution does not say that plants have consciousness or purpose. It says that over thousands of years, those plant species that produced chemicals compatible with human brain receptors were preferentially selected, cultivated, and carried by humans themselves. A feedback loop in which both sides changed over time. Thousands of years ago, wild cannabis had low THC content. Today, after thousands of years of humans continuously selecting the highest potency plants for breeding, cannabis is one of the most genetically modified species on the planet. Humans changed the plant. And the chemicals from that plant changed the human brain. So when a person today decides to smoke something, whose decision is it really? The human holding the pipe? The plant that spent thousands of years creating a chemical that fit perfectly into the lock in the human brain? Or the 10,000-year relationship between two species where neither side is completely in control? This question does not have a tidy answer, but the question of who controls whom has been answered by history in a completely different way. The botanical library we have walked through, hundreds of plant species, hundreds of formulas, hundreds of techniques, knowledge built over thousands of years. That library did not disappear naturally. It was erased, in two ways, by two different forces. The first force was straightforward violence. When European colonizers arrived in the Americas, they brought a worldview in which indigenous botanical knowledge was superstition, shamans were agents of the devil, and rituals using psychoactive plants were sins that needed to be destroyed. The priest Diego de Landa in Yucatan in 1562 burned dozens of Maya codices, containing thousands of years of botanical and medical knowledge that we will never know the content of. Shamans were executed not because they harmed anyone, but because their knowledge was considered dangerous to the new order. Rituals were banned. Communities were displaced from the lands where the plants they had knowledge of grew. The same process happened in Africa, in Australia, in Southeast Asia, anywhere traditional knowledge collided with the new power system. And what was erased was not just habits or rituals. What was erased was language, literally. Most indigenous botanical knowledge did not exist in written form, but in language, in the specific terms of each community to describe each plant species, each effect, each preparation method. When a language dies, and hundreds of indigenous languages have died or are dying, the knowledge tied to it dies with it in a way that cannot be recovered by any technology we have. The second force has no shape of violence and therefore is less recognized, but maybe even more thorough. That is commercial replacement. The tobacco industry of the 19th and 20th centuries did not just sell a product, it replaced an entire ecosystem of practices. Indigenous people around the world once used dozens of different plant species in specific contexts, with subtle knowledge of dosage, timing, ritual preparation, and the meaning of each use. Now they were offered a uniform industrial product, cheap, specifically designed to maximize addiction and consumed alone, anytime, without preparation, without community, without meaning. It was as if the entire culinary heritage of humanity, with thousands of years of cooking techniques, local ingredients, and communal dining rituals, was replaced by a single fast food item designed to make you eat more than you need. A Taino shaman and a Philip Morris executive were both working with the same plant species. They had nothing else in common. What was lost was not only botanical diversity. What was lost was an entirely different approach to a question humans have asked since before civilization: how to change consciousness in a meaningful, prepared, and responsible way. That question still remains. The answers are disappearing. Let us return to the stone pipe in your hand. We began this story with that image, 3,000 years old, heavier than you thought, with a thin layer of black residue inside from something burned long before you were born. At first, the question was what was inside it. Now you know that the answer is never just the name of one plant species. What was inside that pipe was the result of hundreds of generations of observation. Someone noticed which plant had what effect, harvested it in which season, prepared it in what way, used it in what context, and passed that knowledge to the next person so it would not be lost. That was the work of many lifetimes, and that work is still continuing. Right now, in the mountains of Oaxaca, there is a Mazatec healer sitting with a patient in the darkness, with a knowledge system that has answers to questions modern medicine has not even asked yet. In the Australian interior, there is an Aboriginal elder teaching young people how to recognize pituri, not as a history lesson but as a survival skill in a knowledge system that is still operating. In the Amazon and Borneo, there are ethnobotanists sitting with the last elders who still remember the names of plant species the outside world does not know, trying to preserve what can still be preserved before that memory is gone. The pipe in your hand is not an artifact of a dead world. It is evidence of a conversation that has lasted thousands of years and has not ended yet. The right question is not what was inside that pipe. The right question is, where is that knowledge now, and what will you do with this question? If this story has made you look at history differently, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next videos, because there are still so many parts of that library we have not opened yet. And if you know anyone else who is asking questions like these, please share this video with them, because the most important conversations often begin with a question no one thought to ask.